Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective. Today I've got James with me. Hey, James, how's it going?
Hey, how you doing? Quite well.
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
Hope the same
Um,
is true with you.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so what we're discussing today is, in a sense, we're going over some of the, I guess, essential things or the main things that we've covered on the channel in the last few months and kind of consolidating them, I guess. In particular, we were looking at some footage that was broadcast on Middle Eastern news, which was celebrations in West Bank cities on October 7th, and showing civilians celebrating that it had happened, sort of crying to the sky, Allahu Akbar. And this was young and old as well. Unfortunately, there were some young kids involved, which is of course terrible to see. People firing guns in the air, all this kind of stuff. And this was kind of food for thought to prompt us to reiterate some of the key points which we think people need to get. And I think they're also controversial points, the points that people need to get, but they're a bit resistant about fully accepting. So that's why we're reiterating them. So James,
Well,
what?
well,
Yeah.
I'm going to be very controversial today, and I'm going to irritate, I think, our friends both on the left and on the right by what I say about Palestinian culture and values. Yeah, what you brought up was a very, very important point. When you consider the atrocities, the horrific nature of the atrocities on October 7th, and then you look at how on the West Bank, territories controlled by the Palestinian authorities were celebrating in glee. They were writing songs. They developed coloring books. They were the Reuters report. The Reuters report from October was just absolutely bone chilling. The coloring books, plays, uh, uh, new songs that they were coming up with, chanting and celebration. So you have to ask yourself, one more part of the report. At least 11 schools, including 8 operated by the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, that's the West Bank, have enthusiastically celebrated the horrific Hamas attack, which killed over 1,200 persons in Israel, mainly civilians. And this was reported from the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance. Um, we have polls. 72%, and this was a poll done in October, again reported by Reuters, 72% of the respondents said they believed that the Hamas decision to launch the cross-border rampage in southern Israel was correct, given its outcome so far. And this was still back in October. But 22% said it was incorrect. Now, what that means is still fuzzy. Did they think it wasn't the proper timing or something like that? But 72% just said, yeah, correct, good, all in for it. So we have an overwhelming majority of Palestinians who supported the horrific atrocities on October 7th. And you have to ask yourself why. As objectivists, we understand the reason why. Ideas are what shape both an individual's psychology, an individual's values, and the values of a culture. Of course, as objectivists, we judge individuals as individuals. And so, individual Muslims, insofar as I'm allowed to do so, I will evaluate and treat accordingly, according to how they present as an individual. However, you can make certain generalizations about culture. Um, the Dark Ages were the Dark Ages, and they contrast with the Renaissance, say, in Europe, based on the dominant ideas, the achievements in art, science, exploration, economic development were all the direct manifestations of a new change that occurred in European civilization that was focused on certain central ideas, that focused on reason. Now, when we think about culture, what do we think about? We think about science, say. Do we hear? Now, let's talk about the not just Palestinian culture, but the wider Muslim culture in the Middle East. Do they produce great physicists, chemists, biologists? Do they produce great innovations in medical technology? No, they do not. We think of art. I don't want to sound culturally biased here at all, but do we think of great art, original? Well, to have great art, you'd have to have no censorship. You'd have to have freedom. You'd have to have men like Salman Rushdie allowed to criticize the dominant culture. And I'm looking at the wider Iranian and Arab Muslim culture in the Middle East. This culture is stifling. It's stifling of new ideas. And so they have a stagnant culture. They have very little in the way of creative art. Economic development, they are parasites. They use their natural resources to trade with the more industrialized, developed parts of the world, and their wealth is entirely predicated on natural resources, as opposed to, in which they're absolutely parasites, on the economic development of the West. So however you look at culture, all of these ways, the dominant Muslim culture is evil. The dominant, because it is anti-life. It is hostile to the thriving of individuals. It is hostile to the thriving of art, science, economic development, and the prospering of individuals in their society. Now, most people in the Muslim world are happy to go along with that because that is what their intellectual leaders, their religious leaders have trained them to be. Philosophy, though, is what dominates, what controls, in effect. And so, as objectivists, again, I will evaluate this culture. I will evaluate the culture negatively. I will use a word like savage, because any culture that has 72% of the folks there on the West Bank saying October 7th, thumbs up, is a savage culture. And the cause of that are the ideas behind such a culture. And if I may quote from Miss Rand herself, in her 1961 speech, Ayn Rand, Faith and Force, Destroyers of the Modern World, said it, this is more than 60 years ago, said it so brilliantly. I have said that faith and force are corollaries, and that mysticism will always lead to the rule of brutality. The cause of it is contained in the very nature of mysticism. Reason is the only objective means of communication and of understanding among men. When men deal with one another by means of reason, reality is their objective standard and frame of reference. But when men claim to possess supernatural means of knowledge, no persuasion, no communication, or understanding are possible. Why do we kill wild animals in the jungle? Because no other way of dealing with them is open to us, and that is the state to which mysticism reduces mankind, a state where, in the case of disagreement, men have no recourse except to physical violence, and more. No man or mystic elite can hold a whole society subjugated to their arbitrary assertions, edicts, and whims without the use of force. Anyone who resorts to the formula, "it is so because I say so," will have to reach for a gun sooner or later. And of course, what do we have? We have the manifestations all throughout Islamic culture. So long as, let's see, last year in the Iranian Islamic Republic, 2 men were executed for blasphemy. Women disappear last year because they improperly wore the hijab in prisons, only to be later found to have died soon in prison. So long as you have a culture like that, there is no hope. We have to be able to call out this enemy for what it is, the evil ideology and culture that dominates the Middle East today. And this will irritate my culturally relativist friends, my multiculturalist friends on the progressive left, I know. But guess what? Western culture is superior to Muslim culture. It is not a function of race. It is not a function of any other determined factor beyond people's control. It is a function of the ideas that they choose to accept. And the people that are the most responsible are the intellectual and ideological leaders of that culture. I will now respond to the folks on the right. We have to take on, so many traditionalists and Christians in the West have cut Islam enormous slack. And because of their own insecurity about the rational basis of their own mystical ideas. And so they have to give a certain credence, tolerance. We can't question the religious faith. We can't question the religion-based ideology, because that would, of course, imply that we would need to question our own religious ideas, our own tradition-based ideas. And they don't want to do that. So neither the left nor the right want to take on the issue as it must be taken on, in my view. There's no other way around it. This is a suicidal death cult. They are training their children to be martyrs in the cause of wiping out Jews. You just read the Palestinian Authority or Hamas's statement of raison d'etre, the articles that brought them into existence. All of Palestine is a Muslim land. Insofar as Israel controls any of it, it is the individual duty of every Muslim to give their life, if necessary, to destroy Israel and to wipe them out. We are looking at an evil culture, ladies and gentlemen. When you're talking about people celebrating what happened on October 7th, it can only be explained by an evil culture. There is nothing about being Arabic. There's nothing about being Iranian that makes people this way. It is the culture and the ideas. We have to call it out. Unless and until we do, this will continue. This will persist. So long as we sanction, you can't even draw an image of the prophet. You can't be religiously offended without causing a good deal of the Muslim population to become homicidally violent because a picture is drawn. They will kill someone because a picture is drawn. They will shoot up a contest in Texas because a picture is drawn. Now, when you're talking about mysticism on that scale, there can only be violence, force, and savagery as a result. It is Islam and the way Islam is taught today, and we have to say it just like that.
Absolutely. And we just got 99 cents from Bonnie. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And I think where we sort of have to stress that is that a lot of people in the West, a lot of media commentators were very, very quick in the way that they wanted to frame the issue as being this is a war on Hamas, this isn't a war on Palestinians, or shouldn't be. Then they wanted to have a clear kind of dividing line between Hamas and the Palestinian population. And now that's kind of in a sense from a good motivation, in the sense that they don't want to be committing murder, right? And that, that's understandable. But if you don't understand the very deep roots of this in culture, then you just won't understand the conflict. People who I think who read a lot of the news and feel very wised up like to explain these conflicts and get very much stuck into the details and want to say, oh no, this is a product of events at the Al-Aqsa Mosque or something like that. And if you get stuck in those kind of concrete things, then you're not going to be able to actually understand it at its deepest level. And you're obviously going to the deepest level of citing religion and faith and so on, and the rejection of reason as something that leads to perpetuation of conflict, which is very true. One of the other ideas, less fundamental, or on that fundamental level, is anti-Semitism, which is very much an idea which we see that's present in the West Bank and in Gaza, which we've seen is perpetuated by UNRWA schools, for example. The teachers there are perpetuating anti-Semitic stereotypes to the next generation, and that's something that will inevitably have the conflict to continue, because if the next generation of Gazans or of kids in the West Bank grow up thinking that Jews are these sinister kind of people who control everything behind the scenes and who can't be reasoned with because they're inherently malevolent, and it's their duty as Muslims to go out there and root them out from the Holy Land, then there is no way that this will stop, because people act on their ideas, which is another kind of keystone that people are missing out in this. So
think of it.
I think
training your children. We've seen some of these UNRWA classes. We've seen the non-UNRWA education. We've seen the cartoon figures that they use for children's television. We've seen the absolute horrific propaganda encouraging children to commit suicide, to self-immolate, to become martyrs, as they put it, for the cause. Now, think about that. You're training your children to kill themselves. You're training your children to self-immolate because of this idea. Can you think of anything more horrific? That is the extreme example of altruism, living for a cause greater than yourself. Whenever, folks, you hear this altruism stuff about living for society or living for others, or living for a cause greater than self, this is what it really amounts to at the end of the day. Now, what can justify this kind of anti-life, martyrdom, death cult? Well, it can only be a mystic foundation. Only mysticism can justify that. And once you've got this mysticism and altruism thing going, you're down at the crude, anti-rational, perceptual level. So to them, it's a question of race and tribe. Jews, bad, kill. They're not me. So this kind of tribalist racism is the direct manifestation of that same mysticism that is so anti-life. I mean, if you consider death the great liberation, then you are living to die. And so until and unless we take this on directly, the educational system, the culture, the philosophy, it has to be criticized. The Palestinian people, the ideas they promote, and every Palestinian who promotes these ideas is responsible. And when we say, no, Palestinians aren't the problem, no, Palestinians are the problem. Insofar as they accept this philosophy, insofar as they embody this philosophy, even the quiet shopkeeper down the street, some old person, say, down the street, who's cheering this, is in part responsible. He may not wield a gun, he may not wield a rocket launcher from the Gaza Strip, but everyone who accepts this anti-life notion is in fact, in part, morally responsible. We are each of us responsible for the ideas that we accept. This is the 21st century, people. If the son of the leader of Hamas could know better, right? That says something. People can know better. Now, obviously, children are innocent and they're being brainwashed. But insofar as they grow up never challenging, never questioning this suicidal, murderous death cult, they themselves are responsible. And so I would just have to say that any Palestinian who accepts this Islamicist evil doctrine is morally responsible and is the enemy. And that is a perspective that you'll really only get here, ladies and gentlemen. It has nothing to do with their race or ethnicity. It has nothing to do with, as you point out, details, historical details. These people are on the march for death. They want to destroy civilization as such, and they are mired in the most primordial, savage combination of faith and force, much worse than even what Ayn Rand was describing in the West, frankly. As I say, this isn't a question of race or ethnicity. 800 to 1200 years ago, Muslim culture was far superior to Christian culture in the West. It had a golden age. It is not a question of the religion per se. Look how much better Christians and Jews are in the West today than, say, they were 1,000 years ago. It is a function of ideas. And insofar as mysticism still is part of our ideas in the West, we undermine our case for civilization. We are disarmed in the face of Muslim mysticism. So, yeah, I'm afraid the only answer here is philosophy, ladies and gentlemen. And the only philosophy that really has the answers is ours, the philosophy of objectivism, a philosophy of reason and freedom, as opposed to faith and force. That's really the challenge of the modern world, as Ayn Rand said more than 60 years ago. And we see it in such a bloody, vivid, gross way in just the last few months, displaying itself in dramatic extremes that are hard to miss.
Absolutely. So we'll just take a pause here for a word from our sponsor, who for this week is the Ayn Rand Institute. So the Ayn Rand Institute invites young people who've read Ayn Rand's fiction and are interested in studying objectivism more deeply with an eye to a potential intellectual career to AynRandCon. If you live in Europe, we invite you to apply for a scholarship to join us for AynRandCon-Europe 2024, taking place between March 8th and 10th, 2024 in Amsterdam. Or if you live in the US, we invite you to apply for a scholarship to join us for AynRandCon-USA 2024, taking place between the 22nd and 24th of March 2024 in Austin, Texas. You'll have the chance to delve deeper into objectivism and explore its application to a wide array of topics. You'll also have many opportunities to engage directly with experts in Rand's ideas, as well as meet Ayn Rand University faculty and get to know current Ayn Rand University students and hear about their experiences. The deadline to apply for a scholarship is January 31st, 2024 at midnight US Pacific time. Learn more and apply for a scholarship at aynrand.org/start here. And again, just as yesterday, I'd reiterate to everyone that AynRandCon is a great opportunity. It's really cool to get to go, to get a scholarship so that your fees are taken care of for you. Stay in a hotel, go listen to some talks, go speak to kind of your objectivist intellectual heroes afterwards, or discover some new ones if you're relatively new to objectivism. And that's really fun. So I'd recommend everyone go do that.
Absolutely, yes.
For sure. I've slightly lost my train of thought though, James. Where did you end your point when you were saying?
I'm afraid that I was going to come to an even grimmer point as I was pointing out the evil of the dominant culture among the Palestinians. It is truly an evil culture, any culture that could celebrate October 7th. But is the fault of Western intellectuals greater or less? If insofar as we coddle and ignore, insofar as the left is multiculturalist and cultural relativist, and we can't evaluate these other people's culture, insofar as conservatives and traditionalists say, well, it's their religion, we can't be fighting a war against Islam, because we're taking on faith. No. Both sides are wrong here. Both sides are wrong here. And it is our sanction. It is the politicians, the media figures, intellectuals in the West, people like Professor Finkelstein that we've discussed, figures like Owen Jones that we've discussed. It's people like that who really are the most morally responsible because they have been fully exposed to a far better culture. They know better. They can see in stark relief the savagery going on October 7th and the celebrations of it. And yet they raise their voices, their intellectual voices in our high-tech Western media to defend it, to defend it. That is perversity on a still higher scale. That is the fault of the West. That is the fault of our educational system, of our culture. We in the West have lost any connection, understanding the relationship between reason and freedom, for example, or what little we have is diminishing by the day. And so we end up sanctioning, we end up apologizing for, we end up making excuses and justifications for the most primordial, brutal, violent, racist savagery you can imagine.
For sure. And I mean, that's getting to the problem in the West being that we have a kind of lack of ideological health in our own culture, which we need to sort out. But so it also gets to the fact that in the West Bank, in Gaza rather, but also in the West Bank, what needs to change are the ideas and so therefore the culture. However, and something we're going to be talking about on the reality show next is someone who thinks that or people who think there is no military solution to this conflict. However, ideological change is something that is in the long term. It's not going to happen very quickly. And that's unfortunate. So given that the ideas have motivated people in Gaza, Hamas, to violence, and it will continue to do so. So all the people who say that we need a ceasefire, it's really just staving off the inevitable. This will break out again.
The impact of people in the West is both ideologically and militarily can be effective. The Soviet Union, the Soviet Empire collapsed when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan simply stood up and called it an evil empire and began to have some moral clarity. Similarly, I think that if there was moral clarity in the West on this subject, the Palestinians would have the shame and guilt that they have earned in worshiping this death cult, worshiping in this death cult. But more than that, in the short term, we need to use physical force to protect ourselves against what Ayn Rand described as wild animals. So, for example, I can use again, using the 20th century history, Shinto-controlled Japan created a suicidal kamikaze death cult around the emperor in World War II. And yet they were able to be militarily, and only because they were militarily overwhelmed, trounced, shattered psychologically, knew they could not fight back. Then and only then can you sort of get their attention to say, no, your ideas are a total failure. And it was remarkable how quickly Japan turned into a comparatively liberal civilization thereafter, open to trade with the West, open to Western and American ideas. It's now a fusion sort of American and Japanese culture. They're in Japan today. I don't like using the names American and Japanese. It's more than that, a culture of reason, that all humans can repair to. It is possible. It is possible to militarily create the preconditions that can at least clear out and psychologically condition a long-term victory.
Absolutely. So, and then we just have a couple more super chats from some people. So we have $2 from Stephen Harper. Thank you so much, Stephen. $9.99 from Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Daniel's put $2 in the Owen Jones tip jar, since we have a tip jar now every time we mention Owen Jones. And then Cargo Crew has given, I think that's 200 yen, maybe. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so how do we end up affecting change then, James? Because we've said that the problem is fundamentally ideological, or philosophical, cultural. We need to affect that change in these cultures, which are rotten at the core. So how do we do any of that?
We have to know what we're doing ideologically. We have to be clear about our values. We have to be clear that we're defending civilization, that we will put up with nothing less than a culture of freedom that permits the use of reason. And if we're confident about their evil, if we're confident about our positive values, that's half the battle. It really is. It's our confidence and our ability to fight back, and then show them that, well, these people believe in one all-powerful God, Allah, who controls everything. If they lose, if they are on the ropes, Allah, the one all-powerful God, must be chastising them. I would give them a little lesson in what Allah really believes. I don't believe in Allah at all. But the point is that they can be psychologically crushed. They can be psychologically cowed, and only our ideological confidence can make that possible. So a combination of our confidence, our ideological certitude about our positive values, and our willingness to fight them, take them on directly, take on the Islamic Republic of Iran, the ideological source and center of most of the evil here. And if we could do that, we could change the psychological environment of the Middle East, which is really what needs to happen. That can be done through a combination of military activity, but it would have to be serious, overwhelming, decisive military activity. None of this mealy-mouth stuff that Israel is doing right now in Gaza. No, and certainly not the way America prosecutes wars, as in Iraq and Afghanistan. No, we cannot do it that way. So it's a function of our clarity and our confidence about our positive values that I think really is the number one solution, because it will condition our response, our ideological response, our diplomatic response, our military response. And that alone is the only way to get a handle on this.
Absolutely. So I think we'll start wrapping the show up just since the reality show is beginning in a few minutes. Daniel's telling me that that's 200 rupees. So thank you so much, Cargo Crew. And then $5 from Frank Grail, who says, why they're using the word genocide. They say people being killed are women and children. Children are the future of the people. Women get pregnant. I'm not too sure exactly the point exactly, Frank, but thank you. And then Garbled Words gives $5 and says, great talk. This could accompany Sam Harris's recent podcast on Islamophobia as well. I haven't heard that, but I'm sure that'll be an interesting listen. So I'll give that a look.
Where Sam is pretty good. It really is.
Yeah. Because I suppose he does stress, I don't want to go off on a whole other tangent, but I suppose he does stress the connection between fact and value and the importance of ideas, doesn't he? So
and the role of reason. He sees Islamic culture in that sense for what it is. He's a scientist, and he's liberal-minded enough to see that these people are savages, and we really have to call them out in that sense. I'm not sure he'll use that word, but he's at least beginning to criticize the culture, and people are so hesitant to do that. We have to do it. It's not racist, ladies and gentlemen. It's the opposite. It's treating people as individuals and the potentially rational agents they truly are, and that all humans are.
Absolutely. So just as we wrap the show up, the reality show is beginning in a few minutes. We also do have our sponsor today, as I said. Please go check out the links for AynRandCon, which will be in the chat and in the description. And thank you so much, James, for joining me, and we'll see you all tomorrow.